Get your hands off me! I know my rights! Stop resisting arrest! Back up right now!
Cops arrested Black doctor in scrubs rushing to surgery. Patient was their boss's dying wife. Ever since he was a child, he had been fascinated by how the human body worked, how a simple action could save a life, or how a precise touch could change a patient's future forever. Growing up in a small neighborhood, he had watched local doctors serve the community with dedication and compassion. That inspired him to become a doctor himself, and eventually he made it through the years of grueling education, long hours of training, and countless sleepless nights to become a skilled surgeon. By the time he reached his late 30s, Marcus had earned the respect of his colleagues and patients alike. People trusted him not only because he was talented, but because he genuinely cared about every individual who walked through the hospital doors. On a bright, chilly morning, Marcus was finishing his shift at the city hospital. He had just stepped out of the operating room after a long surgery, feeling drained but satisfied. The surgery had gone smoothly, and the patient was stable. As he packed up his things and prepared to leave, his pager beeped insistently. He looked at it, expecting a routine message about paperwork or schedule changes, but what he saw made his heart skip a beat. It was an urgent page from the emergency department. A patient in critical condition needed immediate surgery. Marcus's mind raced. He knew the patient personally, Mrs. Reynolds, the wife of the hospital's CEO. She was a well-known figure in the community, admired for her charitable work and warmth, but she was now in a life-threatening situation. Marcus understood the gravity of the situation immediately. Every second counted, and the responsibility rested on his shoulders. He didn't hesitate. With practiced speed, he headed toward the locker room to change into his surgical scrubs, his hands moving almost automatically. While changing, his thoughts briefly drifted to the challenges he had faced to reach this point. Being a Black doctor in a field where minorities were often underrepresented had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, moments when he had been underestimated or overlooked, and moments when he had had to prove himself over and over again. But he had never let those obstacles stop him. Every patient he saved, every life he touched, reminded him why he had chosen this path. And now, more than ever, he had to focus entirely on the task ahead. Marcus emerged from the locker room in his crisp blue scrubs, ready for the emergency. His pace quickened as he walked through the hospital corridors, the sound of his shoes clicking on the linoleum floor echoing like a countdown in his mind. Nurses and staff members glanced up as he passed, some recognizing the urgency in his stride. "Dr. Hill, is everything okay?" one of the nurses called out. Marcus nodded, his face set with determination. "It's Mrs. Reynolds." "She needs immediate surgery," he replied, his voice calm but firm. There was no time to waste on explanations. The hospital was unusually quiet that morning, a calm before a storm that no one could yet see. Marcus's mind was already running through the steps of the operation he would need to perform. He thought about the patient's medical history, the complications that might arise, and the exact order in which he would need to act. His memory, honed over years of practice, worked like a precise machine, allowing him to prepare even as he moved through the building. He felt the weight of responsibility, but he also felt a strange sense of clarity that often came in moments like this. This was what he had trained for. This was his purpose. As Marcus exited the hospital and entered the parking lot, he was met by a cold gust of wind that ruffled his scrubs. The city was beginning to stir to life around him, cars passing by and people hurrying along the sidewalks. But for Marcus, nothing else existed except the patient and the urgent need to reach the emergency entrance. His pace quickened, almost a run now, as he navigated through the rows of parked vehicles. Each step felt heavy, not from fatigue, but from the weight of the situation. Mrs. Reynolds' life depended on him getting to the operating room in time. Marcus had barely made it halfway across the parking lot when something completely unexpected happened. A police car pulled up suddenly, lights flashing, and officers stepped out, blocking his path. "Stop! Who are you? What are you doing?" one of the officers demanded. Marcus froze for a moment, confusion mixing with a surge of panic. He had never faced anything like this before. "I'm Dr. Marcus Hill," he said quickly, holding up his hospital ID. "I'm rushing to the emergency room. A patient. She's critical, needs immediate surgery." "Please let me through." The officers hesitated, eyeing him suspiciously. Marcus could feel the seconds slipping away like sand through his fingers. He explained again, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "Please, this is a life-or-death situation. She's my patient and she's in surgery prep. I need to get to her now." But the officers were still cautious. They had been trained to follow procedure, and Marcus, in his scrubs and with a sense of urgency that perhaps seemed unusual to them, didn't fit the scenario they were expecting. Inside the hospital, staff members began to notice the delay. Nurses who had been prepping the operating room for Mrs. Reynolds' arrival were growing concerned. The surgical team was ready, waiting for their lead surgeon, but the clock was ticking. Every passing moment increased the risk to the patient, and anxiety was building among the hospital staff. Phones were being picked up, calls were being made, all while Marcus continued to plead with the officers outside. Marcus felt a mix of frustration and fear. He had encountered many challenges in his life, but nothing like this. He had spent years building trust, skills, and reputation, yet here he was, being delayed in a moment that required immediate action. Still, he kept his composure, knowing that losing control would only make things worse. He explained everything once more, calmly and clearly, showing his ID again and emphasizing the patient's critical condition. His heart pounded in his chest, not just from the running, but from the urgency and the stakes of what was happening. The officers finally radioed in, trying to verify Marcus' story. Marcus stood there, the cold wind biting at his face, thinking about Mrs. Reynolds and the hours of preparation that had gone into her care. He knew her life depended on him, and he could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. Every second felt like an eternity, but he refused to panic. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that he had faced high-pressure situations before and had always managed to act decisively. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the tension was palpable. The surgical team prepped for the worst, running through contingency plans, but hoping Marcus would arrive in time. Nurses whispered to each other, exchanging worried glances. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder and louder with every passing second, a reminder of how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change. Marcus' absence was felt deeply. The team needed him, and they all knew it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, verification came through. The officers recognized Marcus' identity and understood the urgency of the situation. They stepped aside, allowing him to rush toward the emergency entrance. Marcus didn't waste a single moment. He ran through the doors, heading straight to the operating room where the team was waiting. He washed his hands, put on his surgical mask, and immediately took charge. His mind was focused, precise, and clear. Every decision, every movement was aimed at one goal: saving Mrs. Reynolds' life. By the time Marcus reached the operating table, a sense of calm determination settled over him. The fear and frustration of the delay melted away, replaced by the focus and clarity that only a surgeon in the midst of an emergency could feel. He looked at his team, nodded, and began the surgery. Every incision, every movement was deliberate and exact. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he also felt the confidence that came from years of training and experience. As Marcus worked, he thought briefly about the strange and unexpected obstacles life could throw in his path. He had faced bias, misunderstanding, and doubt many times in his career, but he had always let his actions speak louder than words. This was another test, one that reminded him of the importance of patience, persistence, and unwavering focus. Outside the operating room, life continued, but inside, Marcus was in a world of concentration, skill, and hope. Hours later, after a tense and demanding surgery, Marcus successfully stabilized Mrs. Reynolds. Her life had been saved, thanks in large part to his skill, determination, and calm under pressure. The experience left him exhausted but proud. He had faced one of the most challenging mornings of his career and had prevailed. And as he stepped out of the operating room, he realized that the world was watching, that the incident with the police officers would become a story about urgency, misunderstanding, and ultimately, the triumph of skill and dedication in the face of adversity. Dr. Marcus Hill's heart was still racing from the earlier delay, but he knew he couldn't afford to dwell on it. Every second mattered, and the patient, Mrs. Reynolds, was counting on him. As he moved through the hospital, he could feel the weight of the morning pressing down on him. The cold wind outside had already faded from his thoughts, replaced by the urgency inside the building. But just as he reached the emergency entrance, a new problem appeared, one that he hadn't expected, and one that seemed almost impossible to overcome. The police officers who had stopped him in the parking lot were still there, their presence unmistakable. They looked serious and unyielding, convinced that someone rushing through the hospital grounds in scrubs might be a threat or someone breaking rules. Marcus raised his hand slightly, trying to show that he meant no harm. "I'm a doctor. I need to get to a patient immediately. She's in critical condition," he shouted, his voice carrying the urgency and intensity of the situation. The officers hesitated, exchanging glances. Marcus could feel the tension building with every second they paused. He explained again, this time more slowly, clearly stating who he was, where he was going, and why. "My name is Dr. Marcus Hill. I'm a surgeon at this hospital. The patient is Mrs. Reynolds. She's your hospital CEO's wife. She needs surgery immediately. Please let me through." Despite his explanation, the officers remained cautious. They had been trained to follow procedure, to make sure no one was entering areas where they didn't belong without proper authorization. Marcus understood that from their perspective, he might have looked unusual, scrubs, running, urgency. But he also knew that hesitation could cost a life. He felt a knot of frustration and fear tightening in his chest. He tried to stay calm, but the seconds seemed to stretch endlessly. Inside the hospital, news of the delay had already reached the emergency room. Nurses whispered nervously among themselves, some walking quickly back and forth, checking monitors, preparing surgical instruments, and trying to anticipate every possible complication. The surgical team was ready, but the lead surgeon, the one who had been most experienced with Mrs. Reynolds' medical needs, was being held up outside. The tension in the room was palpable. Phones rang constantly as staff members tried to find a solution, calling higher authorities and even attempting to reach the police themselves. Marcus looked at the officers again, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please, you don't understand. Every second matters. This is a life-or-death situation," he said. He even offered to show medical credentials again, hoping that a visual proof of his identity would help them realize the urgency. He pulled out his hospital ID and waved it clearly. "Look, I am Dr. Marcus Hill. I am rushing to surgery. Please, I am begging you, don't delay me any longer." One of the officers spoke into his radio, clearly verifying Marcus' identity. Marcus waited anxiously, feeling each passing second like a hammer against his chest. The emergency room staff could see him through the glass doors, pacing and pleading, and they knew the situation was growing more critical by the minute. The surgical team was in position, instruments ready, but the absence of Marcus meant that the operation could not begin safely. They could prepare, but they could not act without him leading the procedure. As Marcus stood there, he felt a deep sense of frustration. He had spent years working hard, building his skills and earning respect in his field. He had faced countless challenges, discrimination and misunderstandings in his career, yet he had always persevered. But this delay, caused by a misunderstanding in a moment of extreme urgency, was testing him in a way that was almost unbearable. Still, he knew that losing his temper would only make the situation worse. He took a deep breath and tried to reason calmly with the officers. Inside the emergency room, the staff began preparing contingency plans. They could start some preliminary steps, but the surgery required Marcus' expertise. The anesthesiologist double-checked the patient's vitals, ensuring that Mrs. Reynolds was stable enough to wait for the lead surgeon. Nurses worked quickly, setting up instruments, arranging monitors, and making sure that everything was ready the moment Marcus arrived. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with anticipation, and filled with a quiet but urgent energy. Outside, Marcus continued to plead with the officers. He explained the patient's condition again, highlighting how critical every moment was. "She could die if we lose any more time," he said, his voice firm but desperate. The officers listened carefully, clearly weighing the situation. One officer seemed skeptical, asking more questions about Marcus' credentials and the urgency of the surgery. Marcus responded patiently, explaining every detail of the patient's condition, what needed to be done, and how immediate the surgery had to be. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus' anxiety grew. He thought about the patient lying on the operating table, waiting for him, depending entirely on his skill and quick action. He knew that the success of the surgery could not be guaranteed if the delay continued. He also thought about the hospital staff, who were doing everything they could to prepare, and about the CEO, who would be terrified to hear that his wife was in danger. Every passing second felt heavier than the last. Then, a breakthrough came. One of the officers spoke into his radio again, this time more decisively. Marcus held his breath, hoping that the verification would finally clear the way. Moments later, the officer turned to him and nodded. "All right, doctor. We've verified your identity and the urgency." "You may proceed," he said. Relief washed over Marcus in an instant. He nodded gratefully, barely able to contain the tension that had built up in his body. Thank you so much," he said, rushing past them and heading straight for the emergency entrance. Once inside, Marcus was met by the sight of his team waiting for him. Their faces reflected both worry and determination. Nurses, technicians, and fellow doctors had all been preparing, knowing that every moment counted. Marcus quickly scrubbed in, his movements practiced and precise. His mind shifted instantly from the frustration outside to the focus required inside the operating room. He checked monitors, reviewed the patient's condition, and began issuing instructions to his team, all while maintaining a calm and steady demeanor. The surgery began, and Marcus' expertise was immediately evident. Every action, from the first incision to the careful navigation of the patient's anatomy, was deliberate and controlled. The staff followed his lead, responding to his instructions with precision. Marcus could feel the weight of responsibility, but he also felt the familiar clarity that came in moments of intense focus. This was what he had trained for. This was the reason he had chosen this career. The delay outside seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the immediate and critical task of saving a life. Even as he worked, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the earlier encounter. The misunderstanding with the police officers was a stark reminder of the challenges that Black professionals often faced, even when performing essential, life-saving work. It was an experience that combined fear, frustration, and determination. But Marcus refused to let it consume him. Instead, he used it as motivation, focusing even more intently on the task at hand. Hours passed, and the operation continued with intense concentration. Marcus' team worked seamlessly, responding to his guidance and anticipating his needs. The monitors beeped steadily, and the patient's vitals gradually stabilized. Marcus, training, experience, and calm under pressure made all the difference. Outside the operating room, the atmosphere shifted as the staff realized that the worst of the crisis had passed. The tension that had gripped them earlier began to ease, replaced by hope and cautious optimism. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus completed the surgery. Mrs. Reynolds was stable and the immediate danger had passed. The room, once filled with tense anticipation, now hummed with relief and quiet celebration. Marcus stepped back, taking a deep breath, his body exhausted but his spirit lifted. The experience had tested him in every possible way, but he had prevailed. The patient's life had been saved, and the hospital had witnessed both the fragility and resilience of human life. As he stepped out of the operating room, Marcus was greeted by colleagues and staff who had been waiting anxiously. There were nods of respect, smiles of relief, and words of gratitude. The incident with the police officers had been a challenge, but it also highlighted the importance of communication, understanding, and quick thinking in emergencies. Marcus knew that the experience would stay with him for a long time, not as a source of anger, but as a reminder of the responsibilities and pressures of being a doctor. Later, the hospital administration would review the incident in detail. The officer's actions would be understood in context, and policies would be updated to prevent similar situations in the future. Marcus, meanwhile, would continue his work, focused on the patients who relied on him every day. The experience had reinforced his dedication, his skill, and his unwavering commitment to saving lives, no matter the obstacles. After the tense confrontation outside and the rush to the operating room, Dr. Marcus Hill felt a brief sense of relief. But he knew better than to let his guard down. Surgery was never predictable, and life-threatening complications could arise at any moment. As he looked at Mrs. Reynolds lying on the operating table, her face pale and fragile, he could see the severity of her condition. The monitors were already beeping steadily, showing fluctuating vitals, and Marcus knew he had to act quickly and with absolute precision. Every member of the surgical team was focused, aware of the stakes, and ready to respond to any sudden crisis. Marcus began the procedure with methodical care, his hands moving with practiced skill. He had performed countless surgeries in his career, but each patient was unique. Mrs. Reynolds' age, medical history, and current condition demanded extra attention. Marcus mentally reviewed the plan he had prepared on the way to the hospital, adjusting it in real time to respond to the patient's current needs. He communicated clearly with his team, giving instructions calmly but firmly, ensuring that everyone was synchronized. Minutes turned into an hour, and the tension in the operating room remained high. Marcus noticed a subtle drop in the patient's blood pressure, a signal that something was not quite right. He immediately instructed the anesthesiologist to adjust the medications and alerted the nurses to prepare for a potential complication. Every person in the room moved efficiently, anticipating his needs without needing further direction. The urgency was palpable, but Marcus' calm focus set the tone, keeping panic at bay. As he continued the delicate work, Marcus' mind stayed razor-sharp. He thought through every possibility, every risk factor, and every step needed to save Mrs. Reynolds. The surgery required precision, patience, and quick reflexes, all at the same time. Marcus' training and experience were crucial now, but so was his ability to stay composed under extreme pressure. Outside the operating room, hospital staff monitored the situation closely, aware that the minutes ticking by could mean the difference between life and death. Suddenly, a critical moment arrived. A complication developed in the procedure, A blood vessel that was fragile had begun to bleed more than anticipated. Marcus' heart rate increased slightly, but his hands remained steady. He instructed the team on how to control the bleeding, working quickly and methodically to prevent the situation from worsening. Every motion, every decision had to be precise, as even a small mistake could be disastrous. The nurses and assistants responded immediately, passing instruments, preparing sutures, and supporting Marcus as he worked. While managing the complication, Marcus reflected briefly on the morning's events. The delay caused by the police officers had felt unbearable at the time, but now it seemed like a small obstacle compared to the challenges within the operating room. He realized how crucial every second had been, both outside and inside the hospital. It reinforced the idea that life was unpredictable and that sometimes even the most skilled professionals faced circumstances beyond their control. Yet, what mattered most was how one responded to those challenges, with clarity, courage, and determination. The surgical team remained focused, working as a single unit under Marcus' leadership. He maintained constant communication, ensuring that every action was coordinated and deliberate. The blood loss was gradually controlled, and the patient's vitals began to stabilize. The tension in the room remained high, but the sense of teamwork and shared purpose gave Marcus confidence. He knew that the people around him were skilled and committed, just as he was, and that together, they had a real chance of saving Mrs. Reynolds' life. As the surgery progressed, Marcus faced another unexpected complication. The patient's heart rate began to fluctuate, creating additional risk. He immediately called for additional monitoring and instructed the team to prepare for rapid intervention if needed. Marcus' mind worked quickly, analyzing the situation, considering potential outcomes, and deciding the best course of action. He remained calm, even as the pressure intensified, understanding that any loss of focus could jeopardize the patient's life. The hospital staff outside the operating room were growing increasingly anxious. Nurses and administrative personnel waited nervously for updates, aware of the critical nature of the situation. The CEO of the hospital, Mrs. Reynolds' husband, was informed of the emergency, his concern growing with every passing moment. Calls were being made to other doctors, just in case additional support was needed. The entire hospital felt the weight of the situation, but Marcus' steady presence inside the operating room provided reassurance to those who were anxiously waiting. Marcus continued the surgery, carefully navigating the patient's anatomy and addressing each complication as it arose. His training, experience, and intuition all combined to guide his decisions. He made small adjustments, recalibrated instruments, and communicated constantly with his team. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a shared determination to succeed. Marcus knew that the patient's life depended not just on his skill, but on the coordination and effort of everyone in the room. Hours seemed to pass in what felt like minutes. The surgery was complex, and the complications required constant attention. Marcus remained fully engaged, every sense focused on the task at hand. He could feel the weight of responsibility, but he also felt a deep sense of purpose. This was why he had chosen medicine, why he had endured years of training, challenges, and long hours. This was the moment that defined everything he had worked for, the opportunity to save a life when every second mattered. As the procedure continued, Marcus noticed subtle improvements in the patient's vitals. The blood loss was under control, and the heart rate was stabilizing. He communicated the progress to his team, ensuring that everyone remained vigilant and focused. The collective effort, skill, and determination of the surgical team were now paying off. Marcus felt a small surge of hope, but he knew better than to relax. The surgery was not over until the patient was fully stable and safe. In those moments, Marcus also reflected on the human element of medicine. Every patient was more than a medical case. They were someone's loved one, someone with hopes, dreams, and a life to live. Mrs. Reynolds' life was precious not just to her family, but to the entire community she had touched. Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just as a doctor, but as a human being entrusted with another person's life. It was a weight he carried willingly, with humility and dedication. Finally, after hours of intense focus and precise work, Marcus began to feel that the worst of the complications had passed. The patient's vitals stabilized further, and the immediate threats were under control. He continued the procedure, carefully completing each step, ensuring that every detail was attended to. The surgical team, exhausted but determined, followed his lead, understanding that their collective effort had saved the patient from the brink of disaster. As the surgery neared completion, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The tension that had dominated the room for hours began to ease, replaced by cautious optimism. He knew that there were still recovery steps to be taken, but the critical phase had been successfully navigated. The patient was alive, and the immediate dangers had been mitigated. Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that medicine was always unpredictable and that vigilance must never be abandoned. Once the final steps of the procedure were completed, Marcus instructed the team to begin closing. Every movement remained careful and deliberate, ensuring that the patient would have the best chance at a full recovery. He double-checked the monitors, verified the patient's stability, and coordinated with the nurses to ensure that post-surgical care was ready. The room, once filled with tension, now carried a sense of quiet satisfaction and relief. Marcus allowed himself a brief moment to exhale, knowing that the patient had survived a life-threatening crisis. As the surgical team began moving the patient to recovery, Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. The day had started with urgency, stress, and unexpected obstacles, but it had ended with a hard-earned victory. He knew that the patient's journey was not over, but the critical phase had been successfully navigated. Marcus took a moment to reflect on the events of the morning, the confrontation outside, the tense moments inside the operating room, and the collective effort that had led to success. The hospital administration would later review the situation in detail, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances and the remarkable performance of Marcus and his team. Policies would be updated, lessons learned, and awareness raised about the challenges faced by medical professionals, particularly in high-pressure and unexpected situations. Marcus, however, did not focus on recognition. His attention remained on the patient, the team, and the ongoing responsibility to save lives. As the patient was safely moved to recovery, Marcus finally stepped out of the operating room. The relief on the faces of his colleagues, the hospital staff, and even the family members waiting outside was palpable. Marcus felt gratitude for his team, for their skill, dedication, and ability to perform under immense pressure. He knew that saving Mrs. Reynolds' life had been a collective effort, one that required courage, focus, and unwavering commitment from everyone involved. In that moment, Marcus also reflected on the broader implications of the morning's events. The confrontation outside with the police officers had been a stark reminder of the challenges and biases that could arise in unexpected ways. Yet, it had also highlighted the importance of persistence, communication, and professionalism. Marcus had faced every obstacle with focus and determination, and in the end, it had made a difference. The experience would stay with him for a long time, not as a source of anger or resentment, but as a reminder of the responsibility, pressure, and rewards of being a doctor. Marcus knew that there would always be challenges, emergencies, and unpredictable situations in medicine. But he also knew that with skill, courage, and dedication, he could make a real difference in people's lives. The morning had tested him in every possible way, and he had emerged stronger, more focused, and more committed than ever. When Dr. Marcus Hill stepped out of the operating room, the bright hallway lights felt almost unreal. Hours had passed inside that room, yet time outside seemed frozen. Nurses stood quietly near the walls, watching him closely. Some held clipboards, others folded their hands, but all of them were waiting for the same thing, his reaction. Marcus removed his mask slowly, took a deep breath, and nodded. That single movement was enough. Relief spread through the hallway like a wave. "She's stable," Marcus said calmly. A nurse let out a quiet sigh. Another pressed a hand to her chest. Someone whispered, "Thank God." The tension that had wrapped itself around the hospital all day finally began to loosen. Mrs. Reynolds had survived the surgery. The danger was not fully gone, but the worst had passed. Marcus leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle into his body. His legs ached. His shoulders felt heavy. But beneath the tiredness was something stronger, a deep sense of purpose. He had done what he was trained to do. He had saved a life. Not long after, the hospital's CEO arrived. His face was pale, his eyes filled with worry that had not left him all day. When he saw Marcus, he walked forward quickly, ignoring the formal setting and the staff around them. "Doctor," he said, his voice unsteady, "is my wife?" "She's alive," Marcus replied gently. "She's in recovery now. The next 24 hours are important, but the surgery went well." The CEO closed his eyes and lowered his head. For a moment he couldn't speak. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You saved her life," Marcus nodded. "I did my job. Your wife is strong. That helped." But the CEO shook his head. "No, you went through more than you should have today. I've been told what happened outside." Marcus didn't respond right away. He had replayed the events in his mind many times already. The confusion, the delay, the fear of losing precious time. It was not anger he felt now, it was clarity. "I don't want this to happen to anyone else," Marcus said simply. "Not to any doctor, not to any nurse." "Not during an emergency," the CEO nodded firmly. "It won't, I promise you that." News of the incident spread quickly through the hospital. Staff members talked quietly in break rooms and hallways. Many were shocked, some were angry. Others were simply tired of stories like this repeating themselves in different forms. Marcus became the center of many conversations, though he never asked for attention. Later that evening, hospital leadership held an emergency meeting. Procedures were reviewed. Communication gaps were discussed. Clear identification systems for medical staff during emergencies were proposed. Coordination with local law enforcement became a priority. The goal was not to place blame, but to prevent future harm. The police department also responded. Senior officers visited the hospital the next day. They spoke privately with Marcus. Their tone was respectful and serious. "We regret the delay," one officer said. "We understand the impact it could have had." Marcus listened carefully. "I understand procedure," he replied. "But emergencies don't wait for procedure. People's lives don't pause." The officers nodded. They promised changes, better training, and improved communication with medical facilities. Whether those promises would last, Marcus didn't know. But he spoke anyway because silence never created change. Mrs. Reynolds remained in recovery for several days. Each morning, Marcus checked on her before starting his rounds. Slowly, her color returned. Her breathing became stronger. One afternoon, she opened her eyes and smiled faintly when she saw him. "My husband told me," she said softly, "about everything." Marcus smiled back. "The important thing is that you're healing." She reached for his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me." He squeezed her hand gently. "I never would." When she was strong enough, the CEO invited Marcus to his office. It was not a formal meeting. There were no reporters, no cameras, just two people sitting across from each other. "I've worked in hospitals for decades," the CEO said. But this opened my eyes in ways nothing else has. Marcus listened. You faced delay, doubt, pressure, and you still saved my wife's life, the CEO continued. That says more about your character than any title ever could. Marcus shifted slightly. Praise made him uncomfortable. I just want to work in a place where trust comes first, he said. And you will, the CEO replied. Because of you, we're making sure of it. In the weeks that followed, changes were put into action. Emergency access routes were clearly marked. Medical staff were given secure identification recognized by both hospital security and local police. Joint training sessions were scheduled so emergencies could be handled faster and with less confusion. Marcus returned to his routine. Early mornings, long surgeries, quiet moments with patients and families. Life moved forward as it always did, but something had changed, not just in the hospital but in him. Colleagues stopped him in the halls to thank him. Younger doctors asked for advice. Nurses shared stories of times they had felt unseen or unheard. Marcus listened to all of it. He didn't position himself as a hero. He simply shared his experience and encouraged others to speak up. One evening, as he left the hospital, Marcus paused in the parking lot. The same place where everything had gone wrong and then right. He looked around, breathing in the cool air. There were no flashing lights this time, no shouting, just quiet. He thought about the young boy he once was, dreaming of becoming a doctor. He thought about the road that had brought him here, the challenges, the doubt, the perseverance. And he knew something with certainty. He would keep going, because saving lives was not just his job, it was his calling. And no misunderstanding, no delay, no obstacle would ever change that.